Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this Achates live session recorded on Thursday, the 5th of June for broadcast on Thursday, the 12th of June. Today, we'll be talking about how to identify and harness the fundraising talent in a cultural sector organisation. My name's Jacoba Bruneel, and I'm a consultant here at Achates. Achates is a cultural sector consultancy supporting organisations in their contributed and new earned income generation, their impact measurement and evaluation, business planning and strategy at both organisation and policy level, as well as leadership development, change management, and of course, recruitment. Our monthly series of Achates Live takes a deep dive into a range of key topics and areas of focus or challenge in the contributed and earned income spaces. Whilst we acknowledge that Achates doesn't necessarily have all the answers, what we do have is an overview of the sector itself, and we are passionate about using this perspective and role in a supportive way. Finally, just to say that all of the information shared in today's conversation is of course live and correct at the time of recording. And I'm delighted to welcome today's panel, who will be exploring the topic of harnessing the fundraising talent in your organisation with me this afternoon. And firstly, we have Rowena Dean, who is Development Director at Birmingham Museums Trust. She leads on the Trust's fundraising and generates income from the public sector, charitable trusts and foundations, individual donations and corporate sponsorship. Rowena was previously Head of Development at National Museums Liverpool, where she led their fundraising team for over 5 years and secured streams of funding that will deliver an ambitious 10-year master plan of Liverpool's waterfront. Her other roles have included Head of Development at Liverpool Everyman and Playhouse Theatres, where she led the fundraising campaign to redevelop the 28 million Everyman Theatre, and Development Manager for the Royal Northern College of Music. Welcome, Rowena.
Hello.
Hey. And next up, we have Deborah Larwood, who is Director of Income Generation at Achates. She leads on Achates Income Generation Consultancy across the cultural sector, and prior to Achates has held senior positions in both venue-based and touring cultural organisations, as well as the higher education and further education sector in both London and Yorkshire. Her previous roles have included Head of Development for Opera North, where she oversaw the 18 million Music Works Capital campaign, Director of Development at Mindview Academy of Theatre Arts, and Fundraising Manager at Sheffield Theatres, where she led the 1.9 million Lyceum Capital fundraising campaign. Welcome, Deborah.
Hello, Jacoba. I'm excited to get into this topic with you and Rowena today.
Brilliant. So I'm delighted to start talking about this topic. First, I'll set a little bit of the context around this idea of fundraising talent across an organisation. So we all know that fundraising and advocacy are distinct but important companions, and to do either effectively relies on good knowledge and understanding about the context your organisation is operating in, the detail of who you're working with and what change you are bringing about, as well as the ability to then translate this in ways which will resonate with your audience, be that a funder, an individual prospect, or indeed a policymaker. At Achates, when working on fundraising cultivation strategies, we often invite our clients to think about money as a vehicle which brings about the change. And in making an ask for support, we're effectively telling someone what our organization's purpose is, why the work is needed, and who will benefit as a result. So we are asking that prospect if they share an interest in driving that change, and the money that they give is a vehicle which enables a change to be made. When we break it down this way, we can begin to demystify fundraising and hopefully demonstrate that people working in all sorts of roles in a cultural sector organisation can contribute really effectively to thinking about fundraising and, of course, to the act itself. And those of us who have worked in fundraising roles know the joy of connecting advocates to an organisation's work through giving. But how do we raise the visibility of this work and unpack it in ways which open up fundraising and perhaps attract talent from within our organizations to move into fundraising roles themselves, and then support other colleagues to add their support to fundraising initiatives and relationship development? I'm really looking forward to exploring this in more detail with our panel today and to think together about how to identify fundraising talent and how to harness it to good effect. And I'd like to start by inviting each panelist to give an overview of their work in this area and to share their opening thoughts and perspectives on this topic. Rowena, would you like to start?
Thanks, Jacoba. I'm so happy that we're having this conversation, and I think it's such an important conversation for us to be having in arts and culture, and actually finding the talent within your own organisation, I think really needs more advocacy. The starting point I'd like to come from is that, well, I've been working in fundraising in arts and culture for over 20 years. I came into it really because I wanted to work in arts and culture, specifically at that time in my early 20s, actually. I really wanted to work in museums, but I didn't know exactly what the jobs were or how. And so much of my career has come from that first chance that I got. And over the years that I've been working in arts and culture, I've done so much recruitment, um, huge amounts of recruitment, and it's difficult. It's really difficult. There have been some roles that I've tried to recruit for before, where I've had to go out 2 times, 3 times to be able to find the right talent for what I needed in the team for that time, what the organization needed, and actually what I needed as a fundraising leader to work alongside me. Um, and sometimes I've got it really wrong. And I've done it because I just needed to fill a role. I just needed more hands. And so the experience that came through looked like it would work. And it's not ended up working out too well for me in that way. And what I've found over the years actually is that it takes the talent is out there, and it actually takes less time to invest the time into bringing someone over or finding someone that might need development in a certain way and to bring them with you to become a fundraiser than it does to recruit someone who might have a bit of fundraising experience actually, but they're not quite right for the role. So the starting position I would come into it in fundraising teams is is actually that that the better route for me has been to look out for and find that talent and nurture it, and that's actually got me to where I've wanted to be faster.
Yes, that's really interesting. And I think it's really nice to think about how it's less maybe about specific fundraising experience and more about that shared purpose that might already be present in the people working in your organization. Lovely. I look forward to talking about that a little bit more later on. Deborah, would you like to go next, please?
Absolutely. I think so in my client work, I'm often thinking together with organizations about how they can harness those talented advocates that can be found in teams working across an organization, working alongside those with that remit for fundraising. And actually in my own in-house fundraising roles prior to Achates, I think I've been really fortunate to be able to work closely with different people in different teams and draw them into fundraising delivery in ways which helps to drive meaningful results financially, but also helps to really positively embed a culture of fundraising. And actually, I've tended to find that when trying to successfully engage and empower sort of non-development staff, if you like, to participate in fundraising, it's been an easier way in to focus around something really distinctive and specific. So maybe a project or a program of work, or of course, a capital project, something which is sort of really tangible that people can get their teeth into sort of as an entry into being part of driving fundraising forwards. And I mean, that's not to say that I don't absolutely advocate for engaging colleagues in core fundraising, but as an entry point in, I think a discrete initiative that can really help to focus the mind and the brief. And actually, I guess sort of speaking to Rowena's really important points about recruitment, as well as thinking about when you are looking to recruit a role and bring capacity and resource into the team, as well as looking outside, I absolutely believe that often the answer is somewhere in the organization already. And, thinking about what Jacoba was saying earlier in terms of fundraising and advocacy, sort of being those partners, some of the best advocates are already working in your organization. And for example, when I was at Sheffield Theatres many moons ago, we had launched a fundraising traineeship, And that was an 18-month sort of fixed term development opportunity to learn the skills and to be supported to, establish a career as a practicing cultural sector fundraiser. And the person that we brought into that role was a member of the front of house and facilities team. And they were phenomenal. They already had great knowledge of the organisation. They were really sort of public facing, great at talking to artists, visiting directors, audiences, confident, had that sort of institutional knowledge. And we were really able to harness that and offer that person some training to develop their knowledge and experience in individual giving and then into trust and foundations. Now they are head of development and comms for a theatre. That they have gone on to progress in their career. And it goes back, I think, to what Rowena was saying about, being given an opportunity. And I think it's interesting because I think that for fundraising, it isn't necessarily that many of us come into the sector feeling really clear that we want to be a cultural sector fundraiser, but actually it's a really broad skill set, and I think it can be found in other pockets of an organization. It just needs to be identified and then sort of harnessed and allowed to flourish and develop. And similarly, when I was at Opera North, again, we had a supporter engagement role that we were recruiting for, and we did recruit externally, but we were also really clear about putting that opportunity out within the organization, and successfully recruited a fantastic member of the box office team, again, who had lots of knowledge about the rep, understood audiences, was confident talking about the organization and was passionate about it. And working with that individual, we were able to give them the tools and the kind of blueprint for how we were fundraising. And they've also gone on into other development roles. So I think that understanding and passion about the work is really foundational to good fundraising. I think assessing where the strengths are and understanding what support and tools are required to help someone to thrive is really important. And also it's mutually beneficial, I think. If you bring someone into your team who's worked in another department, you're learning from them and their perspectives as much as they're learning from you and the work that you're doing. So I'm also really excited to be having this conversation today because look, we all know recruitment is really tough at the moment and has been for some time. And we also know that we need really good talent in order to fundraise well and to ensure, resilience and sustainability of our cultural sector organisations. So yeah, I'm excited to dive into the questions with you both.
Great. I think for my first question, I'd like to pick up on something you've both mentioned, which is that kind of lateral move into fundraising or going into a career in the cultural sector, thinking I want to work in the cultural sector, be that museums or theatre. And I myself have done that as well. I went into working in a cultural organisation and then made a lateral move into fundraising. And I have to admit that early on in my career, fundraising was something that very much sat on the periphery of my understanding within the ecosystem of the cultural sector. And I think that might be true for a lot of people who are just starting out or who might be working outside of fundraising teams, even though we as fundraisers often talk about how it needs to be embedded across the organization. That's not always so clear. So my question to you is, how do you build that organization-wide awareness of fundraising and its role? And what helps draw colleagues into the picture and make it feel relevant to their work? So Deborah, you mentioned those discrete campaigns. So I was wondering if we could come to you first, Rowena.
Yeah, I guess maybe if I start off sharing an example at Birmingham Museums Trust that is very recent. And I joined 18 months ago, no team in place, and started recruitment for a smallish team, 2 managers and an officer, and struggled with recruitment, as I think that we all have done, and went out for one of the manager roles, didn't end up recruiting, and then went out again. And I've checked, and my colleague doesn't mind me talking about this, but a member of our learning team approached me and said, can we have a cup of coffee and a chat about that? I think I've got the skills for it, but I'm not sure. And I cannot tell you how happy I was that she did that. And she had absolutely all the skills to move over, but she didn't quite No, it was a bit of a, she'd been involved in fundraising, worked in an organization that fundraised for a long time, but I think it's hard to picture what your day-to-day life will be like. And it's really very brave to move over. So to yourself as well, Jacob, it sounds like you've done it before. I think it's incredibly brave because you're going into something a bit unknown and you're putting yourself out there. And I spoke to my colleague before this recording today about what the barriers were for her and how she perceived fundraising. Because to be honest, as I said before, I've been working in it for 20 years. I've got my own thoughts, but to hear it from her. And I think it's perceived as being such an outwards facing role, so that somehow you need to be really gregarious and super, super confident, and that your days are all going to be spent talking to high level people. And yeah, of course, we know that a lot of this comes into it, but there are so many different fundraising roles that require different skills. And I think that there's almost like a perception that it's like a TV program or something. And what I've found in the past about breaking that down is very much like you were saying before, Deborah. When you involve people in it, they become part of the process and can see that it's not all down to one person being this charismatic lead character in the organization that somehow money gravitates to. And we all know that we work in fundraising, and actually there's so much more to it than that. So I'll give an example. And this was when I was at National Museums Liverpool. And again, it was project based, which really helped. And we had a potential major donor who was linked to an exhibition that we were working on. But we know that there was potential there for support. We know that this potential major donor had real interest in the local area, in education, in young people. So together with the exhibitions team, with the curatorial team, and with the learning team, we created a donor journey. I know that we all call these different things sometimes, but a plan. And together we problem solved it and broke it down to say, okay, well, in this quarter, let's arrange a visit with the Youth Engagement Forum. And then in the next quarter, let's have a cup of tea with the director. And then in the next quarter, it looks like this. And at each stage, as part of when we were working on that exhibition and when we were coming together as a team, we were doing what we do as fundraisers, usually in our fundraising teams, coming together and looking at that donor journey. And that was absolutely brilliant for us in fundraising. But from that, I could see that the knowledge and the skills were growing across the organization to the point where they were better than me. You know, they were coming up with better ideas than me, which is just what you want to achieve, isn't it? So I think I learned a lot from that around how when you're involving people in the process, you know, you're kind of coaching, you're teaching, but you're working together and you're learning from each other. And that really breaks down that perception that fundraising is one magical unicorn of a fundraiser going out there who just draws the money in. It's all of us working together, often in quite a systematic way. So that worked really well. And now I mentioned I've got a new team at Birmingham Museums Trust. Hooray, I'm so happy. And brilliantly, the team are telling me, they're saying, can we do more with the organisation? And it's good because I've recruited team members that are curious and with the intention that it's a priority to get to know the organisation and form those relationships from the very start, which is a gift of having a new team. And so we're looking at that now. And so actually one of the things that we're looking at doing is running sessions for the teams that are somewhere between training and collaboration. So sharing information about what fundraising is and why we do it, what our existing plans for fundraising are, but also asking people to help us to create our case for support. So that's worked for me so far.
I really love that idea of really involving people throughout the entire journey and breaking it down to show them exactly what goes into an ask, but also build on their skills and knowledge, but then also creating that fellow like joint ownership around the ask, which makes it, an organization-wide kind of journey for everyone. And I think that's really nice and speaks to the culture of fundraising that Deborah was talking about earlier. Deborah, wondering if you wanted to share any more thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, it's interesting in terms of sort of the barriers and the misconceptions. I think there can be a bit of mystery around fundraising, and also, that there is some context in terms of how people feel about talking about money. That for some people it can feel more uncomfortable. And I would say that, if you're working in an organization and your remit is fundraising in that organization, then I think you're really well positioned to find the opportunities to talk to colleagues across the organization about that, and to find the ways to alleviate some of those uncomfortable feelings by talking, as you were saying before, Jacoba, about the impact. The money equals the impact that you can create, and without the money, then it's very challenging to create the impact. And so for me, I think it's making that connection, and also I think giving sort of more visibility to the donors, the funders, sort of putting a face to the names, and they're not just kind of a list of supporters on a page. Whether that is, I don't know, as an example, standing up at a company meeting and giving a bit of a snapshot insight into a donor family or a foundation that are supporting a project, and I guess sort of just demystifying why they're supporting, and I suppose just making it clearer to everybody that ultimately these are people, and these people share the same passions and interests as the people within the organization doing the work to create that impact. And whether it's thinking about the induction process, whether it's thinking about sort of celebrating successes in newsletters, there are lots of different ways I think that fundraising staff within an organization can sort of help to keep it on the agenda, and to keep sort of the conversation going, so that it doesn't sit in a silo and feel like there are meetings happening behind closed doors. Because I think when it starts to feel like that, I can really understand why someone in a different department might think, well, I wouldn't know how to do that. I don't know what that looks like, because it's the fear of the unknown. So that's the first really big thing, I think. I mean, and in terms of how do you support colleagues to see themselves as fundraisers? I mean, I agree with everything Rowena was saying, and there are some fantastic examples there of departments being kind of porous and inviting collaboration. And I think collaboration is really key. It reminded me to think of when I was back in my time at Opera North, thinking about major donors and trying to deepen relationships, and sitting down with the director of orchestra and chorus and just talking through with that person a few of the key major donors and the major donor prospects that we were working on, and sharing a little bit with the director of orchestra and chorus about who those people were, what their backgrounds were, what their interests, what we understood their interests to be. And actually through that process, we were able to unpack and establish some great opportunities. One, for example, was we had a gala dinner coming up, and the orchestra and chorus director said, well, why don't we auction off the opportunity to conduct the orchestra? And in discussing what that would look like, we started to, essentially, we were building a donor journey. So somebody bids for the auction prize, but actually what that then means is that they get X number of hours in the company of a conductor and the orchestra. We were able to open up other facets of the organization in a really meaningful way, and in a way which we knew would really resonate with these types of donors. And that became a springboard into then going, okay, so what's next? Now we've done that, and they've established relationships with these people in the orchestra. How do we move that forward? How do we deepen it? And then that saw the birth of a scheme called Amplify, which was all about sponsoring a chair effectively within the orchestra, and that program continues on. And it is only because of the director of orchestra and chorus and their colleagues being really engaged in that dialogue and helping us to explore what might be possible. And I think in that process, we were able to celebrate the success when gifts came in, of course, but through that process, we were able to show them, actually, it is because of your engagement in this process that we are fundraising in this way. You are part of this fundraising initiative. Fundraising is part of your remit. And that won't necessarily be appropriate for every, type of gift that you might be looking to solicit in an organization. But again, I think it comes back to trying to find the to find the ways, to find the sort of points of connection between your supporters and your future supporters and those people who are in different parts of the organization, perhaps delivering work or in, programming or curatorial positions, and inviting their ideas and thoughts in, because I think it just leads to a much more enriched and holistic and more successful, actually, approach to fundraising.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really interesting when you mention like how all the different departments come together and speaking about building relationships with members of the orchestra, for instance. So obviously when you start widening that lens about who's contributing in the organization to fundraising, I imagine you can uncover some interesting areas of potential. So I was wondering if you could speak to what you feel are maybe specific departments or roles that are often overlooked but might hold great potential for contributing to fundraising. Deborah, I don't know if you want to go first.
Yeah, I'm really happy to. And I think, yeah, to my mind, every department can play a role. It's about finding what that most appropriate role is. And so, an obvious example I would say is, to think about those teams who are responsible for, driving engagement work and outreach work. We know that in the cultural sector, we typically will frame a lot of our fundraising around the programs of activity that meaningfully connect and invite in and sort of offer participation routes to engage with culture, as well as, of course, fundraising for the main artistic output. I'm reminded to think of a time when I was in the middle of pitching to a law firm to support a schools delivery program, taking orchestral music into schools. And we were quite a way down that process of cultivating their support. But actually, the thing that really made the difference was drawing in the individual who was responsible for programming that tranche of work, because that was the person who could speak really authentically about what the teachers are telling them in these secondary schools in Leeds, what the environment is like. They can speak firsthand to the difference that is being made. They can talk through the evaluation because they have led the evaluation. And, having that person alongside me in that setting, I think really strengthened the pitch, the ability to lift off the page the proposition and the difference that supporter would be helping us to make. So I think, those delivery colleagues who really can speak about sort of the work on the ground, who are in direct dialogue with your beneficiaries, really, really powerful, really, really powerful to do that. But equally, I would suggest that thinking about your finance department, the finance director, who are the people that are actually looking at the financial ecosystem of the organization, because I would imagine that they could also speak really compellingly to a potential funder about the challenges that your organization is navigating and the financial need to enable you to deliver the work and deliver on the ambition that you've set out. Again, it goes back to sort of deploying people in the right ways and at the right times. And I will also say that in my experience of working in performing arts in particular, some of the best fundraisers are those who work in stage management, back of house, who can, I think, it's amusing because I think over the years, people have said to me, are you sure this donor wants to come backstage where there are boxes and it doesn't look very pretty? And the answer is, yes, they absolutely do. That's going to really be exciting. It's your day job, but for them, it's an entire world that they're fascinated by. And watching those stage managers, company managers take donors on tours backstage and again speak firsthand about what's been happening in the spaces is you want to bottle it because it's incredibly powerful. And as a fundraiser, you're facilitating that and you're supporting those colleagues and guiding them. But ultimately, once they're in situ and they're flying, I think they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting and making your job a lot easier, actually.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true from my experience as well, that you want to give your colleagues the tools for success, but ultimately the donors do love hearing those first-hand stories, rather to hear the case for support come to life, rather than you just telling them what's already on the website, maybe, or in the brochure, that kind of like, it's the real gritty kind of day-to-day of delivery. Rowena, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I loved listening to that, Deborah. How lovely to just listen to all these different examples of people that have come together that really care about what they do and helping with fundraising. And as you were speaking, it was sort of going through my mind over the years, all the different types of people from organizations. And it's quite incredible, really, when I think back, I agree with you. Finance directors are wonderful, and absolutely people that work directly with beneficiaries in learning, engagement. They are wonderful advocates, and what you see, what you're looking for. I think what I'm looking for when I'm trying to go through that process of who's the right person to bring into this conversation or this meeting is who's the person interested in what area of work, but actually when I put this person in front of someone, um do we believe them? have is And sometimes it's infectious when people talk about their work, and that's the really brilliant thing that can happen when people are talking directly about what they do. But thinking about the types of different people across organizations, I remember at the Everyman and Playhouse we had a wonderful wardrobe mistress, and I mean she was absolutely incredible. Taking people into wardrobe was wonderful. And some of the areas we might not traditionally look at, actually, that I've also found really useful, is people that work with buildings and estates. And what I've found sometimes is that these colleagues, they have wonderful memories, and they know the organization so well, and they have stories for they seem to be the holder of stories. So absolutely. But I think the trick is, now I'm feeling inspired from this conversation, is how we can open ourselves up more as fundraisers to find more people, because some are quite clear and obvious to us, like our engagement teams. They're just wonderful, and actually a lot of that I think comes from they're used to fundraising because they've had to. They are passionate advocates of what they do, but sometimes your learning program is never going to take place unless you fundraise for it, so it sort of comes through. But I'm thinking now about how we can start to find those other advocates and open ourselves up to that. And recently I've had an example at Birmingham Museums of somebody who's moved into a new role, not into a fundraising role, but into a role looking at energy efficiency, actually, who is actually a really, really wonderful advocate, and who can speak well. So I'm keen to find more.
Brilliant, thank you. So you've both talked a bit about that storytelling and how that brings the case for support to life, and we've talked about that in a kind of practical face-to-face kind of context. But I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how you can harness that storytelling across the organization in maybe different ways. Like, do you use that in newsletters or reporting or situations like that, Rowena?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some kind of examples I can give is we have a friends organization that is independent but gives us great support, and they run a magazine, and that's a really great opportunity for us, both to share our stories, but to find people who can share them in different ways. And I find that the written word is a bit easier for people to start. So rather than putting someone in front of the friends, say face to face, I mean they're lovely, but it can still be intimidating. to interview someone or to get someone to do a written interview has been a really useful way in. And this can help you to access different stories. So, for example, recently we've got a heritage apprentice, which is a young person who is really doing really wonderful work. But it felt too much of an ask really at this stage, and we've got to understand the care for the people that we work with to put him face to face. But he did a really great interview, and I think now that's the start of also building his skills and his confidence to be able to do it. And it's also provided us with that really wonderful content. And I think there's something in that as well of the responsibility that lies on us and that care for our colleagues, and particularly, if they're also beneficiaries, people that we're working with, to find the right opportunities for them that they're comfortable with, and providing them that with that support. But that is really wonderful skills development at the same time.
Lovely. And I'd love to ask you a little bit more about that support and training. But first, I wanted to ask Deborah if you had any thoughts around that idea of storytelling and how to bring that to your prospects and audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting. So I think, when you develop your case for support and perhaps you're using those materials for, number of purposes, whether it's a trust bid, maybe in some, individual comms, it's really important that it doesn't remain static. And that's tough because, everyone is stretched, everyone's really busy, but I genuinely believe that good case for support hygiene is, comes down to, again, being really porous as a team. So whether that is dipping into other team meetings and catch up so that you're listening to and picking up from what's happening on the ground so that you can keep that case for support really fresh and live. Whether it's, and also actually, to be honest, thinking about capacity, look at what you're already doing across the organization and think about how you can harness it. So that might be, for example, if you're a performing organization and the marketing and comms team are doing vox pops or, taking audience feedback, is there a way to utilize that to help put more color into your case for support? If your engagement or learning team are in the throes of, surveying, evaluating, again, can those materials help to enrich and keep your case for support really alive? And it's funny, I was thinking about when I was at Sheffield Theatres and the fantastic box office team were doing their point of sale campaign. We started out by giving them some boilerplate sort of script to give them something to work with. And actually, what really worked well in the end was hearing them talk about, they were fundraising around the dementia-friendly tea dances at this time, but hearing them on the phones and at the counter talking to customers about the last week's tea dance and their own experience of what they saw and why they thought it was particularly moving or joyful. I mean, again, they're the things that really make the difference. And that's a storytelling that is authentic and people will connect with, rather than, I think, having the boilerplate texts are really important tools, particularly if we're thinking about encouraging and supporting colleagues who perhaps fundraising isn't their sole remit. That support's really important, but I think it's also crucial to give people the space and the bandwidth to be creative and to tell their stories, because ultimately, that is what makes for a more compelling connection and probably a more successful ask as well.
Absolutely. And people give to people. So it's so interesting to hear that story of the box office telling their own stories and why it affected them, and that helping to drive that campaign forward, really. I wanted to go back to what you said, Rowena, about training, and we've talked a little bit about some of the tools you can implement, like building the donor journey, and that being kind of a hands-on, practical way of learning. But what have you found has worked well alongside this to train and support people who are new to fundraising and to help them become confident advocates for your organization?
I think that shadowing is possibly the most impactful thing. And the great thing about shadowing is that there's learning happening when you're there, but you're also together. So it's a very supportive environment. And I see this work both with my own team, but also with people that don't work in fundraising. So I mentioned before that my colleague moved over into the fundraising team from the learning team. And when we had our conversation about this, and I asked her what has been the most useful thing to you, and she's done training, which is great and so useful. So fundraising training, which is brilliant. But what has been most useful to her has been watching and learning and experiencing. So when we're taking someone on, say, a tour of the museum, listening to me and the stories that I tell and how I tell them, but also how I would bring other people in and when. And I think that that has been the most useful thing for her, but also that while you're building up a bank of experience, because if you're just starting to fundraise, you may have great skills, and this is what we want, really great skills, really great potential, but it's difficult to have the confidence in doing that if you don't have a bank of experience behind you. And what I've also found really useful is that my colleague will say to me, is this normal? About a situation, because you can instinctively think something, or you can be dealing with a situation with great skill, but you kind of need to know, is this how it normally goes? Does a trust normally behave like this? So that shadowing it and that working closely together has been, I think, the most impactful thing, combined with specialist training and reading and actually getting in there and doing the job. I would say that the shadowing doesn't just have to be from the fundraising team, and I would look to senior teams here as well. And I would say in our organization, so lucky when I came in. Sometimes you go into an organization and sometimes you can immediately see who your advocates are going to be. And our director of collections, I often say, is the best fundraiser in the organization. Absolutely wonderful. Been there for a long time, very confident. But it's because of this individual that lots of relationships are really quite strong with potential donors and donors. And teams shadowing him and how he works is one of the best things for fundraising. So seeing how he does it and how he manages it, but also for teams to see it from someone in a leadership role and understand that that is the type of advocacy we need has been so incredibly useful.
Yeah, I love that idea of shadowing, and also to demystify that fundraiser role, and to, shed light on those conversations, which can be really intimidating if you go into them brand new to fundraising. Deborah, did you have any thoughts on this training and support?
Yeah, I do. I'm going to just add one point. I think Rowena's made some excellent points, and I agree with them all wholeheartedly, which is whether we're thinking about, I don't know, it could be that you're working with a trustee and trying to, bring them into fundraising, or it could be that you're moving a colleague from a different team into your own team. Whatever the circumstances, one thing that I have found in my experience that can work really well is, rather than as from the starting point drawing them into cultivation and ask, drawing them into stewardship and reciprocation. Because for me, that feels like it is all this, it's all the same. It's just the other end of the process, if you see what I mean. And so, for example, if you're bringing someone into the team and you really want to get them up to sort of give them the tools and the skills and abilities to be able to write great trust bids, start with a trust you've already got on board that you're in the process of reporting to, because again, I think it's a really helpful way into thinking about, you've already got the support and now it's about demonstrating the impact that you've delivered, and understanding how you demonstrate the impact delivered in turn helps you to understand how to cultivate support for another piece of work or the next grant. And similarly, and again in particular, because I think individual giving can feel arguably the most sort of nerve-wracking if you haven't done it before, because it's people's personal wealth, etc., is drawing in those individuals into a relationship where a gift has already been made, so that actually from the get-go they are able to see firsthand and be involved in a dialogue with a supporter who's already bought in, who's already interested, who already shares the passion for the work and the priority audiences and the impact that's being created. And I think that's a great sort of training ground actually for learning that actually talking to supporters or talking to prospects, we're just talking to people. And it's equally as important to be able to be an advocate for your organization when you're in the middle of stewarding or reciprocating a gift as it is when you're cultivating one. So that will be the additional thought that I'd want to throw into the mix at this point.
Brilliant. Thank you both. And I'm mindful of time, so I just wanted to end on a forward-looking note. So I just wanted to ask you, what's one piece of advice that you'd like to give organizations who are looking to unlock internal fundraising potential in a sustainable way? Rowena?
I think it's to invest the time into it, and it will pay you back. It will absolutely pay you back. Whereas you might think, I just need to do the specific thing that's right in front of me and get it done. If you do spend that time talking to your colleagues, setting up spaces where you can have those conversations, and that can take quite a lot of thought, or even, as I mentioned before, bringing someone over and then taking the time to build their confidence as a fundraiser, it will pay you back. But it's that commitment from yourself to make that a priority and to spend the time doing that.
Wonderful. Deborah?
Yeah, probably building actually on Rowena's point. For me, I think it's about transparency and platforming and celebrating. So in the ways that feel most appropriate for your organization, find those opportunities to keep fundraising conversations in busier spaces, amongst more colleagues. Celebrate the success when, gifts and donations and grants do come in, and not only celebrate the success, but also name check, celebrate the colleagues who have played a part. Because I think that is a route to start to, demystify what engaging in fundraising looks like, because it doesn't have to, ultimately it's not that you are being asked to make an ask of a person. You might be, but equally it could be that you are involved in a building tour, or you share some quotes from a project you've delivered. So I think that, but for me the starting point is to find the opportunities to raise the visibility of the work. And then, as I agree with Rowena, I think once you've invested that time and you're making sure that the internal communications are flowing, you're creating fertile ground for conversations between colleagues.
Super. Thank you both for your brilliant insights into how to create like a very collaborative way of working and fundraising across an organization, and then hopefully give people who might be interested in taking the next step into a fundraising career the opportunity to do so. So thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to have you both this afternoon. There's of course so much more we could explore on this topic, and if you'd like to continue the conversation, do come and join us on Achates community, where alongside over 50 practical modules, we also have a space where colleagues across the sector can share their experiences, ideas, and approaches, including ways to support staff in building their fundraising and confidence skills. Next, Achates Live will be after the summer in September. We're taking a little break, but we'll see you then. So keep an eye on your emails. And if you would like to get in touch with us directly, you can email us at info@achates.org.uk. Thank you so much, and see you next time.